Right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us online. Just a quick housekeeping to start with. Can I remind members and everyone attending to have their phones turned to silent. Same goes with Alexas and Echoes and other smart devices. If you are attending online, and I can see we've got several members attending online this evening, please do be muted and turn your camera on when required. If you want to ask a question, please do put your hand up. I do have a screen beside me so I can see when they will shoot up. And other than that, welcome to this meeting this evening. First item is, have we had any apologies for absence, Callum?
No apologies, Chairman, but just to note that councillors Shirley Boy, Phil Cunnington and Anne Chadwick will be attending virtually this evening.
Okay, no. Minutes of the previous meeting. We'll quickly go through them. I'll go through them page by page as my usual format. If you have any questions, please do indicate and we will go through them as we go through. So page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and finally 12. Okay. If there are no comments or corrections, could I have a vote in favour of accepting those meeting minutes as a true record? All those in favour, please raise your hands. It's 3, and there's a couple online as well. And okay, and any against? Any abstentions?
Mine's abstention because I wasn't here.
Fair enough. No worries. 2 abstentions there, so that's carried. We're still good. Okay. Right. So declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to declare? Is anyone here a planning enforcement officer? I assume, Anne, your hand's stuck up from the minutes point of view.
Yes, I can't work out how to bring my hand down. Sorry.
We'll deal with it. Don't worry.
Oh, right.
Okay. Public question time. Were any public questions submitted?
None received, Chair.
Any? No. The member question. Oh no, it's not. Member questions down the bottom. Member questions.
Again, none received.
Okay. So moving on to, very quickly, we'll move on to item 68. I know that this evening the meat of the agenda is actually item 69. So can we try and get this wrapped up before, for planning enforcement building up control update before 7:45, so that we can, because I know that we all want to know as much as we can about the MTFP. So who's taking this one again?
It might be Jason or Stephen.
Stephen, I can just see you have appeared online. So, and Jason as well. So thank you very much. Talk to us, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I understand the committee wanted to hear an update on, or have a discussion about the difference between enforcement regimes around planning, building control, and once a house is built, the Housing Act. So what we've done is we've broken it into 3 so that we can discuss the limitations of planning enforcement and the extent of planning enforcement, and then look at building control, which of course looks at the building as it's being built, and then look at the Housing Act and enforcement once a house has been built. So taking you through in that logical step. Unfortunately, Marcy has got a sore throat, so Jason has gallantly stepped into the bridge to take Marcy's place, and then Ed Shaler is going to talk us through, Roger's going to talk us through building control, enforcement, and then Ed's going to talk us through the Housing Act. Then there'll be plenty of time for questions, so this shouldn't take too long to run through our summary. So I know time is tight, so I'll just hand straight over to Jason to take us through the first slide or 2. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, in fact. My name is Jason Varley. I'm the Operations Manager for Development Management and Compliance. Hopefully you can all see the slide on the screen. It is in the document pack, so you can follow it there if you can't see it on screen. So just to start with, planning enforcement deals with harm caused by development carried out without compliance with the planning regulations, i.e. unauthorised development. And this is assessed by planning officers in the same way that any proposed development is assessed in an application. So using planning policy, government guidance, national guidance, etc. And just like planning applications, unauthorised development, can be acceptable if an application is submitted retrospectively. So in cases where that is there is potential for that, we do invite applications to regularise unauthorised development. And generally people play ball, but there are a few that don't, and we have to follow other procedures if that's the case. And it's got to be remembered that it's a discretionary power, and it should only be undertaken where it's expedient and proportionate. And the issuing of a enforcement notice is a matter of last resort. So we try and negotiate as much as we can to get a good resolution before we get to serving an enforcement notice. And our council's approach to planning enforcement is in line with government guidance, and it's set out in the local planning enforcement plan, which can be found via the link that's on the slide there. And we provide annual training to on planning enforcement to members and town and parish councils, so that people can sort of garner a little bit of knowledge to help us when they're speaking to their constituents. A few stats. We receive around 800 what we call requests for service every year. We did the stats a couple of days ago, and actually we had a record year last year, and we had 856 RFSs, as we call them, and we investigate all of them. So at any one time, the team has around 220, 230 live cases. And of those cases that come in, a lot can be closed fairly quickly, because half of them approximately transpire not to be a breach of planning control. Another 30% are regularised through the submission of retrospective applications. 10 or so percent resolved through voluntary compliance, where someone removes whatever the unauthorised development or use is. And there's a small number of cases that resolved as not expedient to pursue. And in those cases, we do a short report and sign it off in liaison with the ward members. And then notices, as we said earlier, they're a last resort. In 2020, we served 35. Last year were 21, but it's not the number of notices served which is the indicator of the team's performance, because they're only served in the most extreme cases when negotiations have failed. But most notices that we serve do result in planning appeals, which adds to the workload, and often public inquiry are results of that appeal processes that can be followed. We win most of our enforcement appeals, which is good news. And there are a handful of prosecutions and injunctions in the courts each year as well. But it's got to be remembered that planning enforcement is a slow process, and it can take years to resolve. And there's an example at the bottom there. Recently, a transgressor was imprisoned for breach of an injunction. And that case had been going on for 10 years through serving investigations, serving a notice, court prosecutions for not complying with a notice, getting an injunction because they didn't comply even after prosecution, then not complying with the injunction, then trying to get to court after every other negotiation. The judge is telling you to go away and try and mediate. It takes some considerable time sometimes to get to the end of the process. So not all cases or many cases are like that, but it's just an indicator that once you're in the appeal process or in the court processes, the timescales are out of your hands. So it can take time, and it's a bit frustrating for the lay public to understand or think that nothing's happening where we're waiting for courts or the planning inspectorate to bring it to the top of their lists. So that was planning enforcement. Now handing on to Roger for the building regs side.
Good evening. Yes, thank you, Jason. Building control is, as has been indicated earlier, is all about how the building's built. So as a service, we are unique in as far as the local authority service, we are in competition with the private sector. That actually covers all sorts of projects. So it will be literally anything, new housing, commercial, domestic, extension to a property. So everything we do is in competition with the private sector. Having said that, we are a statutory service, so we do need a local authority building control service to be provided, but it's one that's day-to-day is in competition. As far as the building regulations are concerned, they're very much about minimum standards of health and safety, and they cover many areas from the obvious ones, structure and fire, right through to the less obvious ones such as broadband, electrical installations and the like. These regulations are all about minimum standards. They can often be a situation where, because they don't control quality per se and finishes to a building, they can have a difference between what we under building regulations have to accept and what may necessarily be what the client is looking for as far as their finished building is concerned. Having said that, there are many areas actually that are exempt building work wise from building regulation approval. So as you see there are certain fairly basic buildings, but those buildings that can be built to a property, and they can be built to a property that's not necessarily domestic, but ordinarily they are buildings that can be done without any form of building regulation approval. So you can obviously get a situation where you may necessarily have planning permission, but not require building regulation approval. In terms of the process itself, we work through literally from the building control application process, the design stage, right the way through to the building being completed on site. Having said that, we don't actually, and we're not a clerk work service, so we're not there every day overseeing the construction of the building. We are there at critical stages. So there's certain stages during the course of the work that we actually inspect. But having said that, it is down to the attitude, the quality of the builder on site to ensure that between times they're complying at the end of the day with the building regulations. But we're there to do spot checks and to make sure things are in order at that point in time. In terms of the design side, the government does have guidance. It offers that out, but other design solutions can be used. So you can have situations where a client or a designer will want to use a different approach necessarily than what the government guidance says. The government guidance very often is more aimed towards the domestic end of the market, but it does also cover new housing and more simple commercial stuff. But generally speaking, the government guidance is there to offer advice. Building control enforcement wise is a situation where we don't have unlimited control. We don't have ongoing control. So we are limited in what we can do and for how long we can do that after the work is complete. So it is limited to a period of a year. And in terms of any potential prosecution that might take place, that can be up to 2 years from completion of the work. So for building control, it's involved in the process right the way through from, as I say, from inception of the design through to completion, but it doesn't have an ongoing control. So that hopefully gives a brief overview from a building control perspective, and I now hand you over to Ed Shayler to look at the Housing Act implications.
Yes, good evening. My name's Ed Shayler. I'm the head of the Enforcement and Safety Service, and private sector housing for the last 12 years has been provided by the West Berkshire hosted service, the Public Protection Partnership. From this April coming, it will become a Wokingham service under the new Enforcement and Safety Service, and I've fairly recently been appointed into the role. So the key point about the Housing Act 2004 is that is designed to assess hazards in domestic dwellings. So Roger's point that the enforcement capability against breaches of building regulations is limited to 2 years. So any build which was completed more than 2 years ago, bearing in mind that many people live in properties built many years ago, decades ago, when the building regulations might have been different from they are now. If there is thought to be a hazard, and it's typically a tenant who complains about a hazard, it's very uncommon for owners to complain about their own properties for obvious reasons, but neighbours sometimes complain, and that can be something that we can intervene with. But usually it's a tenanted property, either a housing association or a private tenant with a private landlord. And if the hazard is deemed to be what's called category 1, which is the most serious type, the council must intervene in some way. And if it's not quite so serious, we can intervene. We have a power, if we think it is necessary, to serve, for example, an improvement notice on a landlord, as the name suggests, requiring the landlord to undertake some works. In an extreme case where we think that the property is not suitable for habitation, we can serve a prohibition order. A typical example would be a formerly commercial premises used for storage with no windows that might have been rather shabbily converted for residential accommodation. And that would almost certainly breach building regulations at the time, but the conversion may have been done many years ago. So it is relevant that the building regulations that were in place at the time were not followed, because by definition that might mean that the premises are, shall we say, less than ideal, or even less than safe. But we have to make an assessment as of today whether the premises is safe for occupation, whether it can be improved to make it safe for occupation, or if it can't be improved, for example, because there are no windows, no natural light, no ventilation, perhaps a compromised fire escape, we can serve a prohibition order. We have a few other powers as well, like emergency action. A typical example would be central heating, which is faulty and fails to operate in the winter. And if the tenant is a vulnerable tenant, particularly someone who's older, might be vulnerable to hypothermia, if the landlord can't be contacted, the council can take emergency action to repair the heating and then charge the cost back to the landlord. And we have regulations we can enforce around gas safety, electrical safety, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, and energy efficiency standards, which must be a minimum of E in the private rented sector, possibly increasing to C in future years. And the final reference on that slide is the licensing regime for houses in multiple occupation where there are 5 or more tenants. Typical example in our borough might be student accommodation. If it's a larger house with 5 students in occupation and not all related to each other, that makes it a house in multiple occupation. And we also license caravan sites going back to the 1960 Caravan Site Licensing Act, which was updated in 2013 to cover mobile home and park home sites in more detail. So, Jason, I think I'm probably handing back to you.
Okay, so these are just some general points about what the council's unable to help with in those 3 topic areas that we've just been through, which often crop up along the way. So encroachment and trespass issues, well, that's private land ownership. A site clearance, where you do get unscrupulous developers who will clear a site before they implement their planning permission. So if the trees are not protected with a tree preservation order, then there's nothing that the council can do. It's outside of our control. Damage to a neighbouring property, again, is a civil matter. Obstruction of a private drive is a private matter. Obstruction of a public highway is a police matter. Party wall disputes is civil again. Behaviour of builders, unless it amounts to antisocial behaviour or statutory nuisance, such as noise or dust from construction sites, we can't control that. Poor health and safety practices are dealt with by the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive. Asbestos, again, by the same. Restrictive covenants, a private matter again, quality of workmanship, and projects involving private building control bodies. Complaints need to be made to the CIC AIR. Don't ask me what that means, but those are some of the areas that we're unable to take forward for councillors or residents if they're brought to our attention. Thank you.
So I hope that's helpful, Chair. But there's a team of 4 of us happy to try and answer questions if we can, if members have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was very useful. I've got a couple of questions. Members, if you can indicate if you've got questions in the chamber, I will be going virtual first, as Anne and Shirley's hands shot up immediately. So I can see we've got Sam, Paul, Clive. So Anne, you went first, then Shirley, and then we'll come into the room.
Okay, thanks very much. Good evening. On the subject of the planning enforcement, I was just wondering whether the council does feel deterred sometimes from serving notices by the general expense and resource required.
No, not in my experience. That's never been the case. Obviously, we will look at the most cost-effective way of dealing with matters if there is that consideration required. Instead of taking formal action, we might try and negotiate a solution before we get to that point, obviously. But no, that hasn't really ever been a massive consideration in the cases I've dealt with.
Oh, right. Oh, well, that's jolly good. That's encouraging. On the subject where it says most notices result in a planning appeal, usually a public inquiry. A public inquiry is quite a big thing, isn't it? Does it mean that? Yeah,
it's funny. It does mean that, but public inquiries can be massive, like, you know, or they can be a couple of witnesses, a couple of barristers, and a planning inspector. So yeah, we normally hold them in the council chamber, and no matter how big or small. But yeah, they can be either or, and I think the title sort of gives it a feeling of that it could be a very large event.
Yes.
But having said that, they are or they do require a lot of work from the officers who are involved in them, because we have to do proofs of evidence and get professionals on board to defend our case. So
yes.
But they can be small, and they can result in large bodies of the public coming to want to give their say as well.
Right, I see. Okay, thank you very much. On the subject of building, what is it? Yes, building control. I was a bit puzzled by the first bullet. Can a private company do building control?
Yes, building control is indeed effectively either a public or a private function that can be provided. There's probably somewhere in the region just over 100 other companies, private companies out there, and as I say, they literally will deal with any form of project, as I said, whether it's domestic based, new housing, as I say, or commercial. So yes, we are, as it were, in competition. So the client has a choice who they want to use, either public or private, and even between private, obviously, as well.
Oh, I see. Gosh. Well, thank you. I was just wondering whether the council got involved at all with issues at what's now called Loddon Park, Sanford Farm in Woodley, because there were quite a lot of problems with the sort of completion of some of the properties.
Is that Taylor Wimpey?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. No, indeed. No, it was handled by a national company called the National House Building Council, NHBC. Oh. So they actually have their own, again, building control service. So you do tend to find most of the major national house builders tend to use the building control service of the NHBC.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. And then I think it's my last question is about what the council can't do. I see you've got obstruction of private drive being a private matter. I've had a complaint from a resident in Woodley about a neighbour's car, which is, I think, blocks his drive by being on the pavement. Is there any recourse to the council for that?
No, obstruction of the highway would be a police matter, so that would need to be reported to the police.
But what about when it's on the pavement?
Yeah, that's part of the highway.
So it is the police then?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all from me then. Thank you.
Shirley?
Thank you, Chair. And I've got 3 questions for Jason and 1 for Ed, if that's okay. First one for Jason is, you say we've got quite often 800 plus requests for service each year. I'm just interested to know how many enforcement officers the council has?
We have 5 of us.
5. So yeah, so you've got your work cut out, even though a lot of them get cast aside fairly quickly, I'm imagining.
Well, I mean, I say 5, but we do operate like a hybrid model where a lot of the planning officers do both disciplines, and they will dip their toe into the enforcement side as well. And the enforcement officers will deal with planning applications and appeals. So it's, you know, we try to multitask and give everyone those skills so that if we do have the odd person leave or illness, then we've got a bit of resilience.
Yeah, oh no, that's really good, and I think it's also good for each to see the other half.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really good, thank you. And I notice it says that about over 50% of requests transpire to be not a breach of planning control and are closed quite quickly. And I just wonder if is there any redress from whoever raises the issue if they you know, if you come back and say no, that's not a breach of planning control and there's an end to it, does the person who's made the complaint have any right of appeal?
Well, they're informed of our decision, but it's really, I mean, it's for us to decide whether or not there's been a breach or not. But if they come up with some further information where they can tip the balance the other way, an example that popped into my head would be maybe someone working from home, and you know, we're all doing that a lot at the moment, but it's where it tips the balance into it being a material change of use of the property. Say, for example, you had lots of customers and clients coming in vehicles to and fro, rather than someone sitting on their keyboard doing their job. So we might take a view of the level of evidence that we've observed or we've been told, you know, doesn't amount to a material change of use, but then the resident might have done a log and shown that there's lots of activity that we weren't aware of, then we might say, well, there is a breach of planning control and we'll open another investigation.
Right, yeah, okay, thank you. And presumably if a member such as myself were to highlight something and you came back and said that you know, you didn't think there was a breach, and could I then come back and say, well, actually, could you just look at it again, because I really feel certain that there might be something, you know, is that something that members can do?
Yeah, absolutely, they can. Yeah, there's no problem with that. We're not going to take umbrage, and you know, it's often other bits of information come up and which may change our minds, but yeah, no, that's not a problem.
Yeah, thank you. And the final one, not expedient to pursue. I'm guessing that's where you've found something is wrong, but the costs of force pushing it, you know, getting the person to put it right, or the effort involved in getting them to put it right would be disproportionate. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not. Generally, the not expedients to pursues are the ones where we'll invite an application because we think whatever's happened or whatever development or use has occurred is acceptable in planning terms. So we will invite the application, but some people just don't want to spend the money getting an agent involved and putting the application in. So we then have to take a view, do we pursue it with formal enforcement action, or if we think it's acceptable in planning terms, write it off with a non-expediency report.
Oh, right, okay. So basically the person has got away with it. That's what my residents would say, I guess.
To an extent, although, you know, these things can arise or be flagged up when they do, you know, sell the property or whatever, if there's been an outbuilding built that's not permitted development. A solicitor who's on the ball will ask, did you get planning permission for that? Or they'll ask, have there been any breaches of planning control that you've had any dealings with the council about, or something like that. So it can come back to bite you if you don't get it sorted.
Yeah, okay, yeah, they get rumbled at a later stage. Thank you, Jason. And I've just got one for Ed, if I may. talking about these category 1 and category 2 hazards. And as a councillor, from time to time I get reports from people, often in HMOs, of fairly hazardous things. How do we know as members who to go to in this instance, or how to decide whether something is? Do we have to sort of have some idea of what a category 1 is and a category 2, and do we always go to environmental health in the first instance, or is there an emergency person you can go to if you think it's a category 1? Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I had a situation a little while ago where a resident reported to me water coming down a light socket, and I reported it to environmental health, and it did take a bit of a time to get anyone to come out, and so I just wondered whether I had gone through the right channel in that regard.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear it took a while. As I said, I'm quite new in post, and we're bringing the service back in house from April,
yeah.
after which I will have more direct say in how long things take to respond to. But it would all come through environmental health, whether it's an emergency or something that's been static for a long time and somebody's only just got round to reporting it. It'll be environmental.health@wokingham.gov.uk or through the members inquiry route, direct to, if you wish. You wouldn't be expected to know whether it was a category 1 or 2, but to simplify it into as much plain English as I can muster, anything to do with gas, electricity, fire or water, so a bit like the elements, if you like, or falling hazards, so a collapsed ceiling or a dangerous staircase or something like that. So those are the 5 things that when people ask me what is typically a category 1 hazard, it will be one of those. And when I say gas and electricity, I'm including cold in that. So if you've got gas or electric heating and it's not working, obviously in the temperatures like we've got now, properties can get very cold. And if somebody's vulnerable to cold because of health issues or age, more at risk from hypothermia or respiratory illnesses that will be made worse by cold, then that will be a category 1. So gas, fire, water, electricity and falling hazards.
Yeah.
And environmental health, we call it private sector housing, but it all comes under the heading of environmental health, which has got a dot in it for the email, environmental.health@.
Yeah. Okay. Oh no, that's interesting, because as I say, it's useful to know, because this is coming up under planning and enforcement. So if so, I would definitely be environmental health, not planning.
For a situation as you described, yes, a dangerous light fitting with a leak bringing water through. I should caveat, of course, we always expect if it's a private tenant or a housing association tenant that they would go to their landlord first. So the first route, or in the private sector or housing social sector, always ought to be the landlord. But if the landlord is not responding or is responding badly, then bring it to us, because we can oblige the landlord to do something. That's what we normally do. We find out who the landlord is, get in contact and say, please reassure us that you're going to get this fixed. And then if they don't, then we can step in.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Shirley. Alison, do you indicate? Okay, in that case, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. My question was in regards to page 18, Private Sector Housing, Housing Act 2004. It's you mentioned when there's a sort of power to intervene with as a category 2 hazard. I was just really interested in the licensing of housing multiple occupation. With in demand, with affordable housing being even more in demand, I've heard of issues in places like Slough Borough Council, and even like places like Reading Borough Council, where there's issues of illegal HMOs. And is this a problem for WBC? And is this something, it might not be, but if it is it increasing, or what's the picture look like with illegal HMOs in WBC?
We don't have so many as towns like Slough and Reading, where you've probably got a lot of older built housing which has been converted into rooms to let, and particularly where you've got universities or other like trading estates where there's a demand for the least expensive housing, which is all relative these days, of course, because all housing is expensive. But at the lower end of the market, you'll just get a room in a shared house, whether you're an employee on a relatively low income or a professional who's using it as temporary accommodation for work purposes, or a student. On the western edge of our borough, the eastern side of Reading, there are quite a lot of HMOs connected to the university with student accommodation. The licensing nationally is for 5 or more occupiers, which takes most small houses out of the equation. A standard 3-bedroom house, even if they use the living room for a bedroom, which is quite common, perhaps but slightly unfortunately, you still only have 4 occupiers, so it wouldn't need to be licensed unless the council decides to create a discretionary licensing scheme, which has to be specifically designated by a council resolution. Are there many illegal ones? It's a little bit of you don't know what you don't know. So if landlords are hiding the fact that they are multiple occupied, it's difficult for us to know. So we're always keen for councillors or members of the public or neighbours to report to us the same way, as I said before, email to environmental.health and let us know that a property might be being used for multiple occupation, which isn't licensed. One of the things I wish to do from April onwards is put a list of the licensed HMOs on the council's website. It isn't there at the moment, but when we bring the service to ourselves in April, I intend to do that, to put a register so people will be able to check if an address has got a license or not.
Brilliant. No, that'd be really useful. I think, yeah, publishing that where a resident could potentially check, I think would be great.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you very much. Just on the HMOs, you mentioned sort of 3 bedrooms and also using the lounge, and you said about number of occupants 4, but if there was 2 people in each of those rooms, so you ended up with 8 people or even more than that, would then that fall into the category that is a definite HMO?
Absolutely, it would definitely require a license because it's the number of occupiers which is the deciding factor. If it's 5 or more, even if one of them is a child, not an infant, of course, under 1 year old, but if there are 5 occupiers, it does require a license. And even if you had one room used as a double for a couple, it would be 5. 3 bedrooms, the lounge, and then 2 people in 1 bedroom. Sometimes landlords will say that they were unaware, of course. They will plead, innocence, that the second person was moved in without their knowledge, but they are supposed to manage a house in multiple occupation, even a smaller one. It's a little bit complicated, but even if an HMO is not licensed, there are still management regulations which are statutory, and the landlord is expected to basically keep an eye on the property more than they would for a rented property, which is not an HMO. So we do sort of put pressure on landlords and say, well, if you didn't know that an extra person was living in the house, you should have,
Okay, thank you for that. One for Jason. When you do get to a particular point where a notice needs to be served, is a time limit stipulated based on the size of the problem that they have to comply with? And then what happens if they don't do anything or they don't do enough? What's the next steps?
Okay. Could I just add on to what Ed was saying before I answer that, Paul? Just in terms of planning legislation, the threshold for HMOs is 6, and in environmental health it's 5. So where you have HMOs of 6 people or more, they need planning permission. I just thought I'd give that to clarify the different legislations there. But yeah, the time limits. Paul, are you talking about the time limits we give people to comply, or the time limits for things to become lawful through the passage of time?
The time limit that you would stipulate.
That we would stipulate.
Yeah.
Okay. We often, at the beginning of an investigation where we find an issue, we will write what we call a 28-day letter whereby we give the person the opportunity to either cease the breach or submit an application if we're going to invite an application within that timescale. Then that gives them the opportunity to come back to us to say, oh, I can't get an agent to do it that quickly, or I can't do the building works because I can't get a builder. And then we'll ask them for a reasonable timetable that we will agree with them to comply. So it is a bit of a fluid time limit, and often we get criticised for giving people more time. But at the end of the day, we do try and negotiate to get a negotiated solution rather than straight in with the enforcement notice. Does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you very much. I've got one more. That's okay. Roger, if a neighbour alters their building, which is an adjacent building, and that causes a nuisance for their neighbour, is that a building control issue they can get involved in?
In what sort of respect as a nuisance? I mean, we don't get involved with nuisance per se, but what would the work be? Sorry.
I'm thinking maybe if they altered their drainage system, their rainwater drainage type system, and it then started to go onto their neighbours, is that something building control get involved in?
Yes, I mean, building control would get involved if you make any alterations to your drainage system, whether it's foul or storm water, surface water. It's the difficulty, obviously, with that specific situation per se, but generally speaking, yes, they would need to be telling us. It would then be a decision. We per se couldn't stop them discharging it onto their neighbour's property, providing that route complied with building regulations, because we don't have control in that respect. But we would certainly need to know if they did alter it in terms of a drainage alteration per se. As I say, whether it's rain or foul water, we would require building regulation approval or building regulation application.
And
Thank you.
the same thing would apply as the point we made earlier. If the work was done historically, the work was done some years ago, more than 2, then my team would have a look at it to see whether there was a nuisance being caused which needed to be remedied. So just to get that sort of clear, you've got that 2 levels. If the work's being done now or very recently, it's a building control issue. If it's historic, it's nuisance, and we would have a look at it under environmental health powers.
Thank you very much.
That's very useful. Thank you. Clive, be succinct, please.
Thank you, Guy. My first question is for you, Ed. You mentioned a discretionary licensing scheme to stop HMOs, or I guess reduce HMOs. Is this something that you're going to be proposing after April? Is it something that we can do?
In answer to your first point, will I be doing it? At the moment, I don't know, because I don't yet have the service in my area, so I haven't had an opportunity to investigate the level of need for a discretionary licensing policy. As to is it something we can do, then any council can impose a discretionary licensing scheme if there is sufficient evidence that the HMOs are being poorly managed. So that's the key part of the evidence test. Are the HMOs being poorly managed? If they're being very well managed and the tenants, whether they're students from Reading University or professionals or whoever they are, if they're very, very happy with the accommodation, then there wouldn't be any need. And it's, although it may have the effect of reducing the number of HMOs, because landlords might be deterred from operating an HMO because of the requirements of license, that's not actually the intention. The intention is to make sure that the HMOs that are there are well managed. The fee in relation to the rental income from a 3 or 4 person HMO would be very small. It probably amount to about £2 a week, spread over 5 years. So the fee itself may not deter the landlord, although some landlords, perhaps the less reputable ones, are sometimes known to make a habit of avoiding boroughs that have got licensing schemes, and they prefer to purchase or lease properties in boroughs that don't have licensing schemes.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say Steve was about to say something, and then I
Yeah,
wanted to
just
come in on a
something-
point on that as well,
We
Clive.
we could come to members in the future. Obviously, I think we get the new service up and running, and it's going to take a little bit of time for Ed to get everything sorted. But in due course, we could come with a proposal for a licensing scheme if members wish to. But as Ed says, it does require some evidence that it's needed, really. And if there is the evidence that it would help and it would prevent rogue landlords from operating in the district, then it might be something that members might want to wish to look at, and we'll certainly have a look to bring it in the future.
Yeah, I think Ed actually made the point on where it's going to be important is because if landlords avoid boroughs that have it, which means that if some of our neighbouring boroughs such as Reading implement it, then that means they potentially, especially regarding university, that means they potentially shift outside of Reading Borough to Wokingham. So it's going to be very important to observe what our neighbouring boroughs are doing on that. So that's my point. Clive, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is something that is definitely worth looking at, because I'm sure Guy will agree, in early where we're both councillors, there are some problems with HMOs being set up and really changing the character of a road. And people who have lived there for a long, long time don't like that. And I think we should be trying to make sure that there aren't too many bungalows that are knocked down and replaced with 6 and 7 bedroom houses. And perhaps your discretionary licensing scheme that you've mentioned is a way of being able to tackle that. Be nice if it was. Sounds like they probably agree.
I think we can agree with that.
All these decisions are best made with good data, aren't they? So I think what we would do is, when we get the service in-house, is we'll get the data for you in terms of what the issues are and whether they would be resolved by having a licensing scheme, because it is a time-heavy administrative process to introduce a licensing scheme. I've been involved in other local authorities, and it takes quite a lot of time, quite a lot of resource to do it. However, if it solves a problem that you can identify and you say, look, here's the data, it would help with this, it's certainly worth considering. So we'll come back to you in due course.
All right, and then I got a fairly general question on building control and planning and enforcement. So when we go live in April, do we think that we can deliver the service efficiently straight away as soon as we go live? And will it be a better service than was previously provided by the shared service? And do you think that we're going to be able to make some improvements by coming in-house?
I think that's probably one for me, isn't it? Because it's my service which is returning. Building control and planning enforcement are already here, so they're not affected by the change in April. But initially, I will try to under-promise and over-deliver. So I hope that from the 1st of April, the service will be as good as the Public Protection Partnership are operating, and then very quickly, but over time, we'll try to improve it in any way that we can. And consulting with yourselves as local members and local residents will be key to that. You mentioned early and HMOs, and certainly any anecdotal evidence we can get from residents and councillors about poorly managed HMOs. Not so much the number of HMOs, because that's not really in our gift to control, except, as Jason said, if they're very large and they need planning permission. But we are getting 4 members of staff from the Public Protection Partnership to transfer to Wokingham, so that will be a seamless transfer. They're probably already working on cases today that they will still be working on the 1st of April. They're just going to shift from one council to the other. And we've recruited a very, very good manager I'm not allowed to say who it is yet because she hasn't actually got her contract of employment yet and the start date. But we've got her from another Berkshire authority, and she will be a very good manager. So will we be ready to go on the 1st of April? I'm absolutely confident we will. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Are there any other improvements that you would want to add? So I would consider a discretionary licensing scheme an improvement. Are there any others that you can share with us at the moment?
Putting me on the spot, I haven't thought of anything in advance, but I mentioned publishing the register of licensed HMOs, which I think would be an improvement. And given your councillor's comment earlier about how long it took for somebody to come and look at a leaking electrical socket with water, that we might respond quicker to emergency situations. I'm particularly interested in emergencies where the tenant is vulnerable, particularly older people, perhaps living on their own in very cold weather. I'd like to see that we've got not a rapid response if the landlord doesn't respond immediately, that we can actually get somebody's heating back on before it becomes a serious problem for them.
That's quite an interesting comment, because I'm aware of a resident in Early who is in a housing association and hasn't had any water in their shower for 3 months, and the housing association keeps telling him that they haven't got the staff to repair it and they will get round to it eventually, and tomorrow, Friday, is supposed to be the day when they actually get around to it. So I hope they do, but that's something that you think that we can get some control of, even over housing associations.
Yeah, housing associations are a complex issue because, of course, being registered providers of social housing, they should be responsible and professional landlords and get repairs done quickly. But it does seem to have become more apparent in recent years that housing associations are finding it more and more difficult to resource and carry out repairs in a timely fashion. Now, tenants may well be dissatisfied with the service, and that's perhaps not something we can rectify because they're simply dissatisfied with the performance of their landlord. But 3 months does sound like a long time to be without running water. Obviously, one would need to know the exact circumstances to express an actual opinion, but housing associations, it's a strain on council's resources because we shouldn't have to enforce against housing associations. They should regulate themselves under the housing ombudsman. But do you really want to ask a tenant to complain to the housing ombudsman to get a shower fixed? It shouldn't be that difficult for them, should it?
It shouldn't, but he's going to complain.
So he should. Stephen, I noticed your hand quickly shot up. And then...
I just want to make a general point in terms of what else will be an improvement, and one of the things, of course, is that we'll be able to work better in-house in collaboration with other departments. So Ed and I have already had meetings with Dina in housing, and we're talking to Narinda in community safety, etc. And of course, we'll have the new antisocial behaviour team up and running on the 1st of April, which will be an out-of-hour service. And just in general, we're just hoping the new service will be far more accessible to members and the public and parish and town councils. That's part of the reason, really, we're bringing it back in-house. But that in-house collaboration with other departments, I think, will be crucial in terms of how we work with housing associations and get the best we can. So it was a general point I wanted to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a very good point. Shirley, a very quick question, please, because I'd like to move on at this point. I've got some questions, but I'm going to be submitting them in writing.
Oh, thank you. No, it's just a real quickie, and it is to do with this discretionary licensing. If the council were to bring it in, can it be applied retrospectively to existing HMOs, or would it only apply to new ones from the date that it was brought in?
It's a very good question. It does have a simple answer. It applies to all HMOs which are operating as an HMO on the date that the licensing scheme starts. So it's not retrospective in the sense that you can backdate it, but any property which is still in use as an HMO at the date that the scheme begins needs to be licensed from that date.
Good. Thank you very much.
I don't need to put that in writing anymore. Okay, Ed, Stephen, Roger, everyone who's been involved with this agenda, thank you agenda item. Thank you very much. That was very interesting, and it certainly, I think, has helped members gain a much greater understanding on where we need to go when we got our complaints, and also where we can basically leverage the relevant teams. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things improve in April and going into the new municipal year. So thank you very much. We will now move on to item agenda number 69, the medium-term financial plan. And can I ask Mr. Graham Evers to come on down if he's actually here?
He is, and wearing his usual attire of world domination. There you go.
Yep. All right, fire away, Graham. Tell us the news.
Okay. Welcome. Sorry. Thank you all for receiving me again this evening. This is the culmination of many evenings going through our budget, and we completed what we called lockdown 1. That's financial lockdown 1. And I've presented to you in the papers financial lockdown 2. The only addition I have to my knowledge at this point in time, and my expectation in terms of concluding the medium-term financial plan papers that will be going to executive and then council in February, the only addition I have is a supplementary £250,000 inflationary provision for home to school transport, and that has been necessitated through just before, almost the day before Christmas. One of our suppliers became financially unviable. We had to go out to tender immediately, and the quotes came back in. The lowest quotes come back in 60k higher per term, and they provide just 4 routes. So that would be 180k if that was extrapolated for a full year, and I'm sure there will be other pressures as well. So the sole adjustment to lockdown 2 that I've presented you in the papers would be an additional £250,000 year 1 for inflation to cover that very issue around home to school transport that I've outlined there. The papers, obviously, you've received them. Hopefully you've been able to digest them. Myself and John Kaiser are here representing all council services in order to explain any of the rationale issues behind the variances presented to you. And so I think it's probably best if we follow the format we have for the past few sessions, which is you've got the papers, you can run through them and pick out the questions you think will be most useful for us to answer. We have asked, as we did previously, for questions to be received in advance, and thank you to you, Clive, who for sending something through that we received earlier on today. So we're happy to answer those questions and others that may arise during the course of the evening. Just by way of reminder, this is still one of the, if not the most uncertain of times in terms of the council's finances. And that's as a result of the local government finance settlement was again a 1-year settlement. So we do not know the finances, the financial grants and benefits we will receive beyond year one, which is 22-23. So we still do not know what our government funding will be beyond year one. We still do not understand the impact of the adult social care NHS reforms, although we know the numbers to be extremely large. We still do not know the full effect of the impact of COVID, particularly with the onset of the new Omicron variant. And we still do not know and fully understand the impact of inflation across all of our revenue and capital budgets. So all the work that we've presented to you and all of your useful lines of inquiry and clarification, it's a huge amount of work and it's really purposeful, but it does sit in the backdrop of extreme uncertainty. And I think it's entirely possible and I think would be appropriate for at a review point during the year to kind of take stock of where we are on all those key variables.
Thank you. John, do you have anything you want to add quickly before I move to the floor, as it were?
No, not really, Guy, other than to reiterate what Graham said. I don't think ever before the council has been in an environment where any budget we set can change direction. I mean, it's changed direction over the last few weeks, and I expect it will continue to change. And I guess our policy of reviewing numbers and having the ability to submit supplementary budgets where necessary will help for some of the officers, some of the directors of some of the areas. And as I say, I mean, normally you would expect a budget to be as close as you can possibly get. But under these circumstances, I think it's important that officers feel that they have the opportunity, rather than saying it's not in the budget, that they can come to the executive with a paper and ask for a supplementary budget to be submitted.
Okay, thank you, John. First observation I would like to make is I now regret Graham not taking my bet of what was the money that we would have on a one-year settlement instead of three again. And I made comment of jokingly about 3 meetings ago, and hey ho, that's what happens. Does anyone have any questions? Please make your hands now. I know we got some. Well, everyone's hands are shooting up, so I think we'll just go through. Seeing as we've been going through effectively the papers one by one, as it were, on the aspects, I'm going to ask first things first if anyone's got any general questions on the revenue knockdown on page 24. I know it's fairly self-explanatory personally, but is there any of the big numbers that you want to go into before we go into the meat on this? Alison?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, how much more money did we get in this year's settlement? Because that's what we were waiting for and has such an influence on our budget.
Thank you. That question has also been asked by Clive. I will show you the additional grants that we received, if you just bear with me.
Some of your questions being taken for a change, Clive. You zoom in a bit.
Hold on, I'm just getting myself sorted. 2 seconds.
No problem.
Can you see that?
There's a screen behind you, Alison.
Can you see that?
Yeah, can you make it full screen though, if possible?
Okay, hold on. I'll have to go through the slideshow. 2 seconds.
Bottom. If you hit bottom right now.
Oh, sorry, it's too late. There we go. Right. So the question is, what additional grant did we get as a result of the 22-23 settlement? The revenue support grant for this year is 0. For next year, it remains 0. the amount of business rates of about 60 million that we're able to retain was 14 million. It remains at 14 million. New homes bonus was 5.6 million, is now reduced to 4.76 million. Social care grants have increased from 2.2 to 3.1.9, and an other grant which effectively covers all the impact of COVID, inflation, additional responsibilities, comes to a grand total of an additional £1.7 million, meaning to cover the whole lot of our additional pressures, we have the princely sum of £1.8 million. Just to, in case committee weren't aware, our inflation alone is over £8 million. Shall I unshare now, Chairman? Or I'll leave it up.
I was just about to say, leave it up.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Alison, do you have anything following up on that comment, on that question? Clive, anything? Because I know you are. If you ask this one in private, we might as well go through it.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. So there haven't been any other additional grants, Graham, other than what you're showing us there. Where there's that other line, isn't there, where we've got another 1.7 million, but there isn't anything else.
This is the full set of grants released under the settlement core spending power grants section. The only other grant that springs to mind sorry, there will be others, like the public health grant. I don't think that's been confirmed yet. Many capital grants haven't been confirmed yet. There might be things like specific things like housing benefit grants and what have you, but this is the main general funding that supports the council.
Okay, thank you. So we got an extra 1.8 million roughly.
Right.
But your inflation calculation is that inflation could cost us another 8 million.
Yeah,
So
if you hold
Yep.
Sorry, Clive, just so I can show you. Pay, pension, contract inflation, you'll see comes to about £8 million. So those top two slices.
So that gives us a bit of a possible shortfall of £6 million. How are you thinking that we can cover that shortfall? Because if I remember rightly, our reserves might be around the £9–10 million mark.
Okay, the answer, Clive, is these are just two pieces of a jigsaw. So that's not simply it. So we also make service efficiencies to the right hand side, and you'll see obviously that doesn't cover even the full amount of growth or indeed the full amount of inflation. But we also charge an increase in council tax. We have council tax base rises. We have the adult social care precept, and all of those come together on the summary position that I presented to you, which is in lockdown at the beginning of these papers, and was started off the whole process with financial lockdown 1. All of these are factored in, and there is no material change from my estimate. So I was telling you previously that we had about a £2 million shortfall, which would have to come from reserves. I'm now telling you, after that extra 250,000 that I've at late addition, that is about £2.5 million is the net budget shortfall, which will be funded through reserves. But the actual settlement was quite similar to the one I predicted.
Yep, I think you did. You did predict that pretty accurately. I think these two slides that you've shown us, are you able to share those with us?
I was actually going to ask that Clive, that these, if possible, can we have these slides sent to Callum so that they can be shared round at a later, well, tomorrow, hopefully.
Yeah, these
possible.
These slides draft at the moment, so I've just got to make some changes. But I thought I would share the two specific questions with you. But I can you will receive the whole suite. In a public document, but I've just got some say finessing to do with some of the slides.
Okay, fair enough.
Can I ask one of my other questions? That I sent to Graham, so he's got the answer.
Yeah. Go for it. How many did you send in the end? Four. Fair enough. Yeah.
Shall I take this down now? For now?
Yeah, leave it down. Take it down for now.
So you can see my face. Okay. There we go.
So there's a budget gap of 14.3 million in the year 2023-24, and there's a budget gap of 13.4 million in 24-25, and it's said in the papers that some spending could be reduced to cover this, and we could look at other opportunities for extra revenue. Have you got any ideas as to what we might have to do? Because both of those figures, I know it's not the next year, it's the 2 years after, they are pretty high figures, aren't they?
Yeah, first of all, to clarify, it's a cumulative position, so it's not 13, it is capital, yeah. It's not 13 million in 1 year and 14 million again in another year. It's a cumulative capital position, which means we have to find 13 million over 3 years. So it's the cumulative position. So we have taking each year in isolation, we have a credit year 1, we had a deficit year 2, and then a credit year in year 3. So as year 2 effectively generates the problem, which translates to 13 million over 3 years. There's all sorts of ways that this can be addressed. By reprofiling into future years, by reducing the ambition, the size of the scheme, by finding additional income through grants or capital receipts or anything else, or as probably I would suspect a last resort, if it was absolutely essential, we could increase our borrowing paid for by the council taxpayer, which we haven't done for an awful long time, but we can do that. So we could add the cost of additional borrowing to our growth calculations. But like I say, that would be a last resort if we failed to manage down the costs or increase the income through all the measures I had just outlined there.
Okay,
fair enough. And Phil, do you have any?
I'll just say, Clive, if you look at last year's numbers, it's not dissimilar to what appeared in the capital programme last year. In fact, I think they're a little bit better.
Okay. And Phil, do you have any questions on the general position on page 24, as it were?
Yes, just on the subject of the adult social care. Are these figures that you're showing for the 3 years still highly uncertain in view of the adult social care bill and not knowing what the local government settlement would be?
Okay, what I'm presenting to you is to the best of our knowledge, our
Right.
collective knowledge, which includes the directors, the ADs, the councillors, all those involved in getting to this is the best, our best assessment of the next 3 years costs and savings, revenue and capital. However, I am saying that in the context of an extremely uncertain world, a world with facing the impact of continued impact of COVID, the quite startling at times impact of inflation, the unknown impact of the adult social care NHS reforms, and our future funding from local government beyond next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Phil, did you have anything general on this one?
Well, I'm not quite sure how general I can be. I'm really very sorry, Chair, but I had to restart my laptop because I couldn't get my hand up earlier in order to ask questions. So I missed some of Graham's presentation. I do apologise, Graham. But I just did want to ask a question, actually, please, around the reserves, because I noticed that the reserves are predicted at 8 million, although you've just said that probably is going to be 7.5 million now. Is there a strategy, or is there some narrative you can give us around that, and when we start to think about reserves as not being able to be touched?
I'm expecting reserves to be in the region of £8 million. That 8 million incorporates if you saw me flick through those slides, incorporates the £250,000 I talked about. So it's about £8 million, which is okay. It's not ideal. We feel much safer, and I feel much safer when we're in the region of 10 million. But 8 million is not an unsafe level of reserves. But obviously, if it starts moving speedily towards 6, towards 5, then of course that is, and then we move into maybe sort of some form of crisis intervention. What I have said, and yes, sorry, mate, I suspect you missed it at the beginning, is given the nature of uncertainty, I think it will be entirely responsible and appropriate to undertake some form of mid-year review to look at all those big moving parts and how we feature and the state of our balances in the context of that. So I would ideally like it to be higher than 8 million, but 8 million is not unsafe. And being we have the ability to always at any time to kind of take a breath and review and maybe moderate some of our plans, then I'm comfortable we will stay financially sound. But it's about being very conscious of any variance to our expectations in those areas that I described and responding accordingly.
Okay, thanks, Graham. That's it for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, we are in uncertain times. I mean, some aspects we will not know until much later. Sam, I did see your hand up, so I'll come to you in a second. But considering the government is spending a heck of a lot on lateral flow tests, that so in other parts of the country other parts of the globe you're paying 40 quid a pop for 5. There are aspects that we need to be doing correctly. Sam, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question, Graham, was just, you touched on this earlier, but I know COVID is and continues to suck out resources and increase costs. Where are we when we compare ourselves to our near neighbours? And do you think you've built in enough for inflation?
So if I understand the first question right, is the impact of COVID on us in terms of expenditure and income compared with our near neighbours? Was that
Correct,
the question?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mixed is the answer. So in some areas, like council tax collection, we've held up extremely well. And last year we were the highest in the country, let alone our near neighbours. So that's a testament to the empathetic and diligent approaches that were taken to things like council tax collection. And on the other hand, our income has suffered higher than our nearest neighbours due to the arrangements, for example, we have with our leisure contract, which is constructed in a way least favourably to receive any government grant. So if we ran our own leisure services, we would have received considerably more income than we did. We got virtually nothing because of the way our leisure contract was constructed. Car parking is probably held up reasonably well compared with others. I know that depends, it differentiates across the borough in terms of what was impacted most. What I would say though is in terms of costs, we are probably one of the highest, I would suspect, because of the level of intervention we've taken around our role in the response, and which includes our vaccination efforts and all the support we've given to the care homes early in the outbreak. So we've been extremely active, and in doing that, we've taken considerable supplementary estimates to executive that have been supported, which have helped the response calls, which includes, of course, some of our response to poverty and free school meals, on top of the more obvious things like responding to track and trace and vaccinations, etc.
Hey, Graham.
Thank you. So we'll move up. We'll move steadily through the papers now. I presume that no one's, considering we've covered up quite a bit of this, no one's got any further questions on the inflationary aspects, as Clive's question earlier covered up a lot of that. So if that's the case, then on to 26. Does anyone have any questions on the specific items here from adult social care? Not seeing anything. 27 for children's services. Any general questions on those items? What? Oh, Anne, go ahead. I don't know why I'm looking up there. She's right next to me.
Sorry, yes, I was just a bit slow there. Back on slide 26, I just wondered what the 400k for, I think that's what it is, 400k for the staffing resource is. Is that management of social care, or is it the actual cost of providing this, of the actual cost of the social care itself?
This is the so just so we're, okay, I'm just going to the page there.
It's page 26, staffing resource.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the staffing resource needed to deliver the transformation program. So in order to deliver the transformation program, which, if you remember from previous representations made here, there were significant savings associated with the adult social care transformation work, and this is bringing forward what was a year 3 to year 2 in order to more fully embed that transformation program.
So what's being shown there is a cost, I presume?
It's a cost of additional staffing to ensure the success of the transformation program and make it a permanent feature within the service. So transformation, not only to deliver the savings outlined, but to create a permanency there for ongoing change and improvement within the service.
All right. And so it's sort of it's management resource.
It will be it will be skills needed in delivering change. So it will be staff skilled to make and enact change, as opposed to frontline deliverers of service.
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. Did anyone have anything on children's services, which was page 27? Clive, how many you got?
Just the one.
Okay.
It's really, I didn't have time, unfortunately, to go through all of the other previous meetings and try and come up with a lot more questions to understand some of what you've given us now, Graham and John. But I did have a look at our meeting on the 3rd of November, and there's a capital bid CS1 where we were having conversations with the Department for Education about an extra £6 million worth of funding. And the comment that I wrote against it on the 3rd of November was that we're having, as a council, we're having lots of conversations. Couldn't really go into the detail at the time, but we may know more when we get the finance settlement before Christmas. So have we learned any more about this extra £6 million of capital funding that we might want to get from the Department of Education? Have we got any idea if we're going to get it? It was CS1 capital bid.
Okay. I think that was so that is probably basic needs grant, whereby we make an assessment of the grants that are coming through all the government departments, one of which is the Department for Education, and that resources the overall capital programme. So I don't know offhand exactly the amounts of grants we have in the capital financing overall of the capital financing, but we do need to, one thing we need to do is check, obviously, how much we are actually allocated versus what we've forecast. So I'm not able to answer that question because the capital grants haven't been formally announced.
So these would relate to potentially items on page 37 then?
No. Oh,
okay.
Sorry,
well, because when you said it was capital, so I flicked through and looked at children's services, and it says new bid children and care equipment, and then it said new bid basic needs secondary additional places 2.6 and 5.4. So there might be elements of it in there, but if we haven't got the detail, we haven't got the detail. But it's certainly one to get a written answer to.
It was 6 million in this first year, 22-23.
Yeah. So it's worthwhile getting a written answer though from that point of view. That's possible.
Right. I think the issue,
because we haven't got, as Graham's just said, although we've got the settlement for the general fund, we don't have the settlement for the capital grants, and that will explain some of the reasons that we've got the gap in the capital programme, because quite a lot of that gap will be taken up with grants for government grants, different types of grant, infrastructure grants, and some of it will be children's services. So it's and of course the thing with the capital programme, it also includes all, unlike if you look at the revenue grant, it doesn't include any of the school stuff because that's completely separate, the DSG. But the capital programme does include the school money as well. So the money we've got to build new schools, the money we've got to put new sixth forms in, let's say, or upgrade classes, that does appear in the capital programme. And some of that comes through from the government as a grant. So when that comes through as a grant, and we know that, that will then go in to inform the capital programme. Is that correct, Graham?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What we need to do is get hold of all of the grants and assess them against the forecast. Sometimes we're given in capital, we're given very clear indications into the future, unlike revenue, and then any changes, and we've been cautious, so hopefully it'll be positive, will impact on reducing that cumulative deficit that we've talked about, 13.5 million. So when we have the so on page 32, we have capital funding of 236, 84 and 57.8, so 378.9 over 3 years, and any of those variances, capital grant or otherwise, will impact on that cumulative gap.
Well, that makes sense to me. Okay, anything else? Right. So 28, and we are looking at, you know what, I think we can skip through 28 because it's 42k combined. 29, I'm actually going to ask one as I'm mostly silenced tonight. The 500k from the optimized parking income, that's been removed to stimulate economic recovery. I assume that's basically in order to encourage more people to be going through to visiting our local shopping centres, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, this effectively freezes the off-street car parking as it to its current figure, so there is no increase, and the rationale is to stimulate economic recovery. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Paul, how many questions you got?
I've only got the one,
Okay.
which was on page 39. You've actually asked part of my question because it came to this committee on 24th of November, and it was it stated restructuring car parking charges to reflect actual value, especially around long stay parking. It looks like it's been abandoned for 4 years, but is that the truth, or is it going to be reviewed on an annual basis?
Well, the figures presented to you merely shows that the intention to increase in 22-23 has been removed. And it makes no other statement one way or the other.
So there is the potential that this time next year, it would be looked at again as a potential bid.
I mean, obviously the approval of such things lays in the domains of the politicians, but as your chief finance officer, I can assure you every year you as councillors have the opportunity to amend your budget positions, whether it's reducing growth, increasing savings or increasing the generation of income. That's entirely at the gift of this council every February council meeting.
Thank you. So moving on to page 30, resource and assets. The only one that I will note is the fact that, oh, actually I can see Anne and Shirley hands have shot up, and Sam. So Anne, go ahead.
Thanks. I was a bit confused with the income generation in excess of financing costs. Just the wording, it says, so it looks as if it's hoped that there'll be a saving, or there'll be, saving of that's what about £1 million or so, isn't it, by 2024 to 25. I've lost my page. Sorry. But the wording of the next to it says ambition around developing housing and commercial assets impaired through new national guidance. What does that mean?
Yes, okay. Right, well, I think the lines income generation in excess of financing costs, community investment and solar farms, and the delivery of 1,000 houses, those three should be read in conjunction. And if you see if the changes, effectively it says merge with community investment bid, merged with. So the line that said income generation from solar farms has been lost, deleted, and moved into the line above. So income generation, the community investment one, and the delivery of housing 250k that used to also show as a credit has now been deleted. So the line 300 as a debit and the line 250 as a debit, they were previously presented as credits to you. They're now being shown as debits to you to say that they've been deleted. So the only thing that really exists now is that line above, which is the £300,000 credit. Now, the text is all about the fact that well, there's all sorts of things. There's inflation, inflationary factors, but that make it extremely hard to achieve returns on building of housing build, especially if we're going to do it ourselves. Also, the Public Works Loan Board regulations have changed to restrict the council being able to effectively invest in anything that the private sector might be interested in. So it kind of puts us into the domain of kind of regeneration, where maybe the private sector wouldn't be interested, as opposed to maybe investment in say Waitrose that we've done in the past. So we're no longer permitted to do that. And there's further potential guidance around what's called the minimum revenue provision, which is how we repay debt, which means we might have to be repaying debt more ferociously on those types of investments. So we're effectively being more and more having to sideline that type of desire, which was valid in its time, but clearly less so now. And we're now really focusing much more on things like solar farms. So that credit there is almost substantially to do with the expectation of the delivery from our first solar farm.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That wasn't what I was expecting. But thank you very much for that. That's what I wanted to know.
Can I just say the other problem is I'd want to build as many social and as many affordable homes as we can. The problem we're faced with is the cost of building materials. They've gone up significantly. Now, where a normal developer would expect to see 15% return on his investment when he was building homes, we would normally look for a 5 or 7% return. It's going to make it extremely difficult to make that sort of return with the costs of building materials as they are. Now, that may be a short-term problem. It may be. So what we're doing is we're being cautious and saying, right, we won't put everything that we had in to deliver the 1,000 homes. We might not deliver the 1,000 homes. We might only deliver 750 or 700.
Goodness. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, I was just going to ask. I think I understood what you were saying about this merge with community investment bid and the income generation. Can I just ask, what exactly is the community investment bid? That's my first question. I don't know what that is. That us bidding for some money from somewhere else?
No, the community investment is called the executive paper called it investing in our community. It was previously called what we had was the property investment group, and that was much more solely commercial in terms of purchasing the Waitrose, for example. Then in response to the PWLB, Public Works Loan Board changes, we took a paper to executive called Investing in Our Community. So investing in our community is effectively anything that falls within the new PWLB guidelines, which does include regeneration and does include affordable housing, it also includes solar farms. So it's much more restricted what we can do to invest in the community. But the premise is that we invest in the community for the benefit of the economy or the benefit of the climate emergency agenda. And we also are able to make an income over and above the cost of borrowing. So this means not only do you pay off your borrowing costs, but you're also adding value to the community through either a climate emergency initiative or an economic regeneration initiative. That's
Right.
what community investment means.
Ah, okay, yeah, I see. So it's the way to borrow money has the criteria has changed slightly, and this is a different way of borrowing. Great, that's good. Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry, we borrow the same way as in through the PWLB, but it's about what we can apply it on. So we have to apply on a much narrower basket of opportunities. So it's very clearly for the benefit of the community, and it makes a financial return, which means there's a credit on top of the cost of borrowing, as in interest and debt repayment.
Okay, so does that mean that are the sort of investments we were allowed to do before, like the Waitroses and those sort of commercial investments, presumably they paid a better rate of return, so this is a lesser rate of return, or are we thinking it would be a similar rate of return?
Well, you might have been right previously, but if you look at the cost of electricity, the business case, i.e. the rate of return, are huge compared with but maybe 2 years ago that wasn't the case. But right now I'd say the best rate, probably one of the best rate of returns out there, is investing in the solar farm.
Yeah, indeed. And just one other quick question about the crematorium project no longer proceeding following viability assessment. I noticed there's some money in the subsequent 2 years budget. Is that because you will be looking at it again at that point? Is it simply a matter that at the moment, because of building costs, it's deemed not viable, or?
Right, okay. No, what this is doing, you remember these are movements from the previous year, previous iteration I showed you. So in lockdown 1, so these are movements from lockdown 1. In lockdown 1, you'll see a credit of 100,000 in 23-24, and you would have seen a credit of 200,000 in 24-25. This is effectively removing that. So you've got, if you look at your first papers, you would see in red credit 100 in 23-24, in red credit 200 in 24-25. This is the other way around, so it simply reverses it and takes it out of the bidding process altogether.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
But reverses everything that was presented to you before and effectively makes everything zero.
Okay.
Because the other thing
is gone then.
Yes.
The other does do, Shirley, it obviously reduces the capital spend as well, because it would have been in the capital. So the £3 million comes out of capital. So although we lose income that we thought we might have, it takes it out of the capital spend, because we feel we can do better with that capital money, delivering infrastructure and all the other bits and pieces we need to do as a council.
Great. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Shirley. Sam, you indicated, didn't you?
Thank you, Chair. My question was in page 30. It was just regards to just a question on the rationalisation process of corporate accommodation. Just keen to understand what that is.
Okay. There's all sorts of possibilities there, but the general premise is that in line with most organisations following COVID, we realised that we can operate effectively in a hybrid manner, and therefore we're questioning the amount of the footprint that we occupy as a workforce. Now, we recognise that some services will need to be much more physically present than others, and other services can work extremely well in a very remote way. So we've got a project in place called Workplace Reimagined to try to determine the future state organisation in which we will be working, be able to work most effectively for our community, but also in an efficient way as well. So why occupy such a large footprint if we don't need it, when we can use technology? And obviously we can reduce energy costs and other business operational costs as well by reducing footprint. Now, we can make savings by either selling off some of our satellite properties or renting them out, or indeed renting out or utilising spare capacity from Shoot End for all sorts of different potential options there. So we've already started a process of decanting from some of the satellites and moving into Shoot End in the context of that initiative.
The other thing, Sam, what we will be looking at is we will be looking at properties or land that we've got and saying, well, what's today's post-COVID requirement? So, for instance, one of the issues that we do have going on in the borough, and I don't think it will come as a shock to anyone, is we're seeing a big increase in homelessness. And that homelessness in the short term requires us to find places for people to sleep. Some of them are rough sleepers and some of them are just generally homeless people. So what we would do is we would reformat some of the property we've got. We may build temporary accommodation. We may even build permanent accommodation. But it really is a big review about whether or not we're using the space or footprint we've got to the best of our the best use that the council can put it to. I mean, so if we're doing our own homeless stuff, for instance, that means we don't have to send people to bed and breakfast, which is very expensive, and it's not very good when you're putting a family in one room while you try and find them a social home. So we would be looking at good quality temporary accommodation that people could live in for a month or two possibly until we can find proper accommodation for them.
Thank you. And Graham, I think you mentioned that's a really good idea, really, the spare capacity and, keep potentially using extra space. I mean, just thinking out loud, I could see a situation where you could even look at promoting, small startups, look into startup companies in the area and, offering sort of special rates for people, using this sort of spare space, but just an idea.
Thank you. I just lost the slide I was on. That was page 30. Does anyone have anything to comment on? Well, 31's the high level, and so 32, which is any special items. Anyone got any questions on that? Anne, I see your hand's shot up again.
Sorry, yes, it is about page 31 actually. It's just what I couldn't quite understand is, it's probably a very quick thing. In year 2, adult social care, why is the revised figure the same as the LD1 figure?
It's not.
Am I looking at the wrong version?
I looking at page 31, it's saying LD1 is saying 690 changes. That's a 390. Oh no, you're right. 390 saving, and it's showing revised 690 again.
Yes.
Yeah, I can only say that
should be 300, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Well spotted on the typo. I think we all glazed over that one. So no one else has anything on 32? Okay. So we'll move now on to capital. So actually, there's one final thing I'd like to ask in regards to revenue, and maybe Graham, this is much more how long is a piece of string, as it were. But how you've covered the COVID recovery and everything like that in various different aspects, from repositioning of staff into a more hybrid working style to how we are providing for the community in other ways that other aspects, other councils are not. But how do you see the recovery and the hopeful release of some of those staffing resources, etc., to dealing with the pandemic are going to impact on the budget going through? Is this, I know you mentioned the mid-year review, which would probably be around September time, the end of September, seeing as that's about 6 months, because in October, this whole thing kicks off again.
Yeah.
How do you feel on that regard? I know it's a very long piece of string, and I've thrown you the Gordian knot, but I think it's one that it's worth hearing your thinking about.
Okay, right. It's a very good question. So the additional staffing and reorganizing of ourselves and additional capacity is substantially covered by what's called the COMF, the Community Outbreak Management Framework, also called the Community Outbreak Management Fund. And we receive from the government to the end of March, we receive a COMF payment to reimburse us for a lot of this disruption. And unfortunately, the disruption, because of Omicron, has kicked on in a way that we really hoped. We thought we might be coming to the end, but it doesn't feel that way at all now. And we know that the grant will be running out in March. I think it's entirely possible, if we don't receive further government funding, and I don't know whether we will or not, because I know there's a lot of discussions going on in various corridors about this. But if we don't receive additional funding, then we will need to come back to executive for another supplementary estimate to have the resource we need to continue to undertake our role in response, which let's say overcrosses and dual runs with recovery quite a lot of the time, especially when we don't have formal lockdown regulations in place.
So it really is the Gordian knot in that regard. So I think from our point of view, as in this committee, we just need to be kept abreast about what's going on, but also we need to be lobbying our members of parliament to make sure that if this does continue, that government doesn't forget about those councils on the front lines who are basically dealing with that. But anyway, thank you, Graham. I
would say, Guy, can I just say that the really important thing in all this is being fleet of foot. If things change, you should be prepared to change. Now, we don't want to sell the family silver, and that's never been our way. In fact, what we've done with most of our family silver, we've actually developed it and built on it. Our Gorse Ride's a classic case in point. And really to keep assessing what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I would suggest that the crematorium was a good indication of that. It wasn't making the sort of return that we felt we could get elsewhere, so we pulled it out of the capital programme.
Don't disagree at all, John. And talking of which, let's move on to 34, which is the changes from lockdown 1 for the capital programme. Who's got questions on the capital programme on 34? And 34 is the high level, and then we'll move on to the details as we go through. Anyone? And is your hand stuck up, or was it a fresh question?
I do have a question. I'm sorry, it's back on page 32 actually. Might be quick as well again. It's just that as regards adult social care in 2023 to 24, it seems to be shown as a saving, but it says additional staffing growth. And then similarly, under place and growth in 2022 to 23, it's shown as reintegration of trading standards, etc. That's shown as a saving as 250,000, but isn't it a cost?
Well,
Okay. Shall we start with was the first one the top line, the 300?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Right, we're looking at special items here. So what we're saying is we're reducing the special item request that was previously there.
Oh, sorry, right.
Because we're now putting in as growth. So it's effectively saying, so if you remember, I was talking about staffing before, about the growth. So this is saying it was in as a special item, as a 1 year resource. It's been taken out as a 1 year resource because it's actually needed permanently. So it's been taken out as a one-off, as in a 1 year resource. So there are credits there. It's coming out because it's going into growth, which is on another sheet where it goes in as permanent capacity.
Right. And is that a similar thing for the reintegration of trading standards, etc.? It's in a different pot now.
No, the 250k credit in place and growth is to do with the fact that there was a request to bring it forward effectively through executive, through a supplementary estimate that brought effectively 21, 22 and 22, 23's worth of money together in 21, 22 means it's no longer needed again in 22, 23. So if you go to that executive paper that was publicly agreed quite a few months back, it asked to bring forward the special item. And because it's been brought forward into 21, 22, we don't need it in 22, 23. So that's why it's a credit here. So it now offsets the debit of 250, making it zero, that particular line.
Oh, right. OK, thanks very much indeed. I suppose a similar thing, it's just a very general question then on page 34, which I was meant to be asking a question about. Oh, OK, no, forget that. OK, that's me finished. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. 34, 34, any comments on the high levels? Okay. So going on to that, which is 36. Paul, does it relate to highways?
It does.
Hooray!
Yeah, I bet you didn't want to put money on that one. The scape construction line, it says existing budgets reviewed, savings offered at 2 million and 3.5, with construction costs rising significantly. Is this a reduction in what's planned to be built?
All I can say is, as far as I'm aware, this is simply looking at what the commitments are and the plans and commitments are, and looking to see what money is actually needed in a more precise way. So it's not the let's only build one road instead of two. It's more they're pretty modest sums. They're kind of roundings in the enormity of the scape construction project.
Yeah, it's such a big project that whenever anybody estimates these things, they always estimate them a lot higher than they actually are. They actually turn out to be, even with the inflation we've got in building costs. And all we're doing is, this is a bit of tidying up, because we're seeing costs which aren't being reflected in that project. So it's not a reduction in any way. It's just that we think that to deliver what we've agreed isn't going to cost us much money. Am I right in saying, Graham, as well, that we've reduced the amount of money we were going to spend on Townley Depot, which that will also have an impact on that?
Yeah, that, let's see, is that one? I'm trying, no, Townley Depot Oh no, that's the infrastructure. No, there's nothing in.
No, that's come outside the scope project. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But yes, this is a more an act of greater precision, given we know so much more from when the initial scope projects were put together.
Okay, I've got another one, which is the highway infrastructure flood alleviation schemes. So that's been reprofiled. So this is really essential work which has been delayed. Do you agree?
I'm not an expert in this area. All I can tell you is that there was some flood alleviation schemes initially programmed in year 1, which are now considered to be more appropriately dealt with in year 3 through the subject matter experts' professional opinion.
I think that's a question.
Can I just say, yeah, I know what you're going to say, Guy, because I'm going to say the same thing. I would suggest, Paul, that if you're concerned about that, you write to Andy Glencross, who puts his budget together, and he will explain to you why he believes that money is no longer needed. It's an operational issue. As I say, Graham and I are here very much as people that pull numbers together. We are guided by the directors who tell us what they think they're going to spend.
And that's one point. The second point is we've actually got flood risk management coming up on the 28th of March at our next meeting, so we can cover it off there as well. So that works. Is that okay, Paul?
Yeah, I've got one more actually.
Yep, go for it.
Which is just at the bottom. Well, the second one from the bottom is the same applies. So that's about the public rights of way being delayed as well. So I'll write to Fran, is it? I think. But I'll write to Andy anyway. So thank you for that, John.
Yeah. Sorry, if I could just also, by way of clarity, these are just changes from the previous, so they're not the entire budgets. So if take that highways infrastructure 1.7 credit in year 1 and then the debit in move to year 3, that's not necessary. That's not saying that's the whole of the highways infrastructure flood alleviation scheme. It's just saying 1.7 of it is moving from year 1 to year 3, same as public rights of way. It's not saying it's the whole of the budget is 1.2. It's saying 1.2 of it, the total quantum, is moving from year 1 to year 2. Just for clarity.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Graham.
I think the other thing I would just say about that is a lot of this stuff is getting reprofiled, not because we're trying to push it out, but we can't physically get the work done. COVID's caused so many problems with staff and everything else. We're catching up on stuff that we thought we would have been doing. We would have already done this year. We won't be doing now until next. And I guess that will continue and that will help. It does help without question the funding gap, but we get as much done as we possibly can. And that's why we always underspend the capital budget, because we just can't find the contractors to do the work.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, John. Just on the very bottom one, the feasibility and first stage of new non-highway crossings, new foot and cycle structures in the borough. That looks like that's been delayed, certainly over this next 3 years. Is that the case?
Again, it depends on whether that was the total budget or a part of the budget. And obviously,
so we'll need clarification again on that. So if that's the case, then Paul, can you email Andy and make sure that myself and Callum are CC'd in on that email so that we get the results that way we can circulate to everyone else as well. I did have a point that's gone from my head. And is your hand up for a question? Otherwise, I'll go to Sam.
Yes, it is. Yes, I just wanted to ask. Sorry, I'm on page 35. Looking at year 1, the MTFP stroke new bid column. The figures are very sizable compared to the reprofiling. I just wondered, is that usual, or is that why is it? Why are they so sizable compared to what you presumably were expecting?
Okay. No, it's not that unusual to be honest. So when a capital scheme, so it depends on the size of a capital scheme that where the budget. So let's take a school. If you've got a major secondary school and you approve it for £40 million, you'll approve it in year one. The reality is that probably maybe 15 million will be spent in year one and 25 million in year two because of all the organising ourselves, feasibility, mobilising the contractor, etc. Then the real work takes place in year two. So you see in that case, the reprofiling is bigger than the actual year in which the budget was initially approved. So we've tried to enhance our practices rather than pretend the budget approved in year one, say 40 million for the school in year one, all belongs to year one. We've said that we understand you've approved in year one £40 million, but we're going to profile it how we really think it will be spent. And therefore we're showing that these are in 21-22, there's been a lot that's moved forward into 22-23. So there's a legitimate reason why it happens anyway. On top of that, of course, we've got the whole of the disturbance of COVID, the supply chain, inflation, concern of financial viability. That means we've tried to postpone spending decisions where we can and where it doesn't have detrimental impact on service. So we've shunted quite a bit from year one to year two when we can, given all of the difficulties and uncertainties created through COVID. So there's a very legitimate reason for it, regardless of COVID, but it's fair to say that COVID and inflation and supply chain has been another reason to make that an even bigger figure.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sam.
Thank you, Chair. My question was as regards to page 35, adult social care. Just keen to, I think we've gone in detail previously on, adult social care and the resourcing, staffing costs that are going to be a key challenge over the next sort of year or two. What are the main sort of challenges in regards to sort of capex, on that side? What do you see? Is it mainly just going to be building costs, or is there any other sort of capital expenditure challenges that you see sort of coming up?
Sorry, did you say adult social care?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue in terms of capital on adult social care will be similar to that being faced by children's services, which is the ability for self-provision. I suspect if we could, Matt and Phil is obviously on the line, I'm sure Phil wouldn't disagree, if we could build 2 or 3 dementia care homes ourselves so that we could keep our residents in the community and avoid high cost out of borough placements, that would be fantastic, and I'm sure we think we will be able to fill them very quickly given the exponential growth in dementia care need. And that's a similar story to say children's services is that of self-provision. The best simile for children's services will be special education needs. We have such a paucity of provision, and we need to build the assets to accommodate that need. So both our care services, adults and children, I'm sure if we found the land and the business and we could create the business case, we would be looking for a much higher level of self-provision. But you'll already see in the papers and the bids, that's why the dementia care housing unit is being put forward in adults. But I'm sure if we could put 2 in, that would be gratefully received as well.
Graham, I have to say that was on my Santa list, and so I'm going to be extra specially good this coming year because we haven't quite got there yet.
Yes, indeed.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Phil, as well. So moving on to 38 and 39. Again, it's a lot of things are just shuffling around and changes. I think the electric vehicle charging points, looking at the self-funding aspect, that's things like that. So I'll write a question and send that off for a proper answer, as it were. Paul?
That guy was going to be my question about.
Oh, I can answer that.
Aspect.
Oh, you can answer that. Go ahead then, Graham.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I can tell you where every charging point is intended to. No, I can't. But I can tell you why those figures of 0.5, 1.1 and 1.2 credits are there. Initially, they were put in as just expenditure only. And the premise now is that if we undertake or provide electric vehicle charging, we will do it in a responsible way, which means that it would cover its own costs. And therefore, that's effectively the self-funding, showing that it's self-funding, which if you add the debit of the cost, then you've got the self-funding, which is the credit here, you come to a zero net cost to the council.
So just so I can understand that, have you got evidence from other authorities that's installed EVs, charge points, that you actually get this additional income coming in over and above the originally investment?
I don't, but there's a gentleman that who's already been mentioned several times this evening, Mr. Andy Glencross, who's also undertaken a pilot in this area, which has been approved by executive for us to do that. And we've got some government funding, and it will be through the, let's say, trial of this scheme and the learnings of this scheme that will enable to embark on that particular capital program venture or moderate it in some other way. But the premise at the moment is that it can be achieved in a self-funding way.
Yeah, the other thing with that, Paul, is if you do use electric points to charge your vehicle, you will know, if you have an electric or part electric vehicle, you will know that the charges now being charged at these points is such that it's almost as expensive as petrol. And again, I don't see that changing. So any assumptions we made today, I would suggest going forward, are going to be significantly greater than we would have thought, which is much like the solar farm. In fact, the cost of electricity has seen a doubling in the profitability of these solar farms.
Okay. Thank you. One final whip round for questions, as it were, because that is technically the last page. Clive and Paul.
Yeah, on the last page, page 39, California Crossroads, were we intending to do some fairly major work there, and we've now cancelled it for a couple of years?
Yeah, I can explain that. Basically, Clive, that was part of the development, the SDL. The SDL's not come out of the ground anywhere near as fast as we thought it would, and to do the work that needs to be done at the California Crossroads would cause massive disruption in that part of the world. And I can tell you, my sister claims she lives on the island of Finch Hempstead, and I don't think that the residents would welcome major roadworks there. So we're giving them just a little bit of a breather, and our traffic numbers and travel numbers wouldn't indicate that it's actually needed at this point in time. And that's why we've been able to push it forward a couple of years.
Okay, and how about the Shinfield ERR? It's, yeah.
I mean, that's a very big cost. It's something that we're going to have to look at as we go forward. It's something that we need to understand whether there's an opportunity to repair it or whether or not it needs to be taken down completely, which is a massive cost to the council. And obviously that's not funded by developers, that's funded by the council. So it's, again, we need to be confident that we know what we're going to do with it going forward, but it's not something that needs immediate work at the moment other than general maintenance and checking and make sure it's safe.
Okay. And one of the questions that I did send in earlier that I forgot about is how much income will we generate from solar farms, assuming that we've only approved one so far at a cost of 20 million?
Yeah, the the paper we took to executive, let's say, permitted us or required us to set an equalisation fund up. So I can answer this in the context of the Equalisation Fund. So over the period of the scheme, the average amount of income over and above the cost of the interest on the debt and over and above the cost of the required annual debt repayment is estimated at the moment to be £1 million. So it will start below 1 million and then it will rise above 1 million. But the average annual benefit over and above the cost of borrowing is currently estimated at £1 million, which is the figure referenced in the papers.
Okay, thanks. And over how many years is that?
I think it's 15. It's the life of a solar panel. I think. Well, you're on mute, John.
Sorry, it's 25.
Is it 25? Okay.
Yeah. So we spend 20 million on it and we get 25 million pound over the life, over the cost of the farm, including the interest.
So the £1 million that Graham mentioned was £1 million a year.
That's
yes,
correct.
Correct.
Right.
It's an average £1 million per annum over the life of the scheme, which is surplus over and above the cost of the capital financing costs of interest and annual debt repayment.
Yep. Okay, thanks. And then my last question is a pretty general question, and it's over all of these four meetings that we've had, and it is just to get your confirmation, really, that all of the savings that we've been expecting and talking about during these meetings, that they're all still viable, they're all still achievable, and that we should be able to get all of those savings despite what's happening with inflation, with the cost of building materials, and with the continuation of this COVID pandemic.
Yeah, okay, I can answer that from a chief finance officer's perspective. The process is that the directors must be in support and the lead members must be in support, and that's clearly set out in the templates that we've provided to you, which have been signed by both. And I'm sure you'll also be aware that the ADs and service managers are involved in all of that as well. So it's their bids. They stand by the bids. They're not bids that myself and John make up and say, you've got to save 2 million in adult social care. It will be Matt Pope and Charles Mulgetts who will be working out how and agreeing how they save £2 million in adult social care and so on and so on for the other directorates. So I think it's really important that we do not create nor take responsibility directly for the directorate savings. They are wholly and properly owned by those officers and the members. Furthermore, there's a collective ownership of the process and the challenge and the holding to account a corporate leadership team, and also in private executive and with corporate leadership team and private executive. So all those things go on as forms of collective ownership in that process. And I cannot, as a CFO, put forward a budget I do not believe to be reasonable, achievable. So effectively, I'm presenting a budget in achieving some of those savings, and there may be things that happen that makes those savings impossible. But there is no benefit for me nor any of the stakeholders and those engaged in the process to create pretend savings that cannot be achieved.
Well, I would also say, Clive, although it may seem we do a bit of abdication here by saying they're not our numbers, we just put them together. The question that gets asked most during the budget reviews tends to be, are you sure about that? Okay, and because people have got to live with these numbers. I mean, it's their jobs, it's what they do for a living. The executive members have got to live with it. I mean, we beefed up the KPIs, which in part is something that we will be using to monitor whether or not, and we have given them the opportunity to come to us for supplementary money, but that requires a visit to the executive with a paper to justify it. So we're hopefully stopping that once quite widespread comment, we don't have it in the budget, because anybody who says now is what they're basically saying to you is, we don't think what you're trying to put forward is important enough to go into the budget, because if they did, they could put it forward as a supplementary estimate. The other thing that supplementary estimate does is it stops. When I picked this job up, I mean, the first job I had to do was to go to an executive and explain why we'd spent £2 million more in children's services than was budgeted. In future, we will be bringing that to executive before we spend the money. The argument, it's statutory, we've got to do it, no longer cuts it. It needs to be presented with a paper to explain why they need the additional budget, additional money. So I think those things are really important, because it stops this silo, you know, just, and I can tell you a little bit about Slough. If you look at what's happened at Slough, it's because they had no control. There was just parts of the council that were just running off and spending loads of money, and the justification was always, oh, well, it's statutory. Well, we see the problems that puts Slough in. So I think that trying to do it that way, I feel quite confident that this budget that we're putting forward to you to look at tonight, I feel quite confident it's a realistic budget in a very, very uncertain world.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just in case my words were misunderstood, I wasn't at all talking about abdication of responsibility. It's appropriate location of responsibility and collective ownership, and financial management only works in a world of collective ownership.
I think that you were both confirmed that certainly as far as you're concerned, and the rest of, you know, the executive, John, and the senior leadership, Graham, that all of the savings that we've been talking about for the last few months are still relevant, still achievable, even though we're in these very difficult times. So thank you for that.
That's all right. I mean, we've all worked for firms, Clive, where we've put a budget in and the boss has said that's not enough. I mean, that isn't how it works here. It does work from the bottom up rather than from the top down.
Thank you.
And I think Graham, John, you highlighted a very important point about what happens with one of our neighbouring authorities, and this is the role that we in this chamber and the other overview and scrutiny committees fulfil. is we do get the opportunity to look at things, and sometimes the right questions are not asked at the right time. This process we do here, it takes up a lot of our time in the autumn and winter months, but it does enable us to look forward into the spring, as it were, knowing that we have actually looked at this process a lot more thoroughly than some other councils do. Paul, you did have a question, didn't you, or has it already been covered off?
I did have a couple of questions, but Clive actually asked them. So
maybe Clive, take a holiday one month, one meeting. We might get through a lot more questions that other people could ask. But no, that's fine. I think we have naturally come to the end then. I know there's more work to be done behind the scenes, but I feel that once again, Graham, John, you've come before us. You've and the rest of the officer and executive team, you've given us the answers. You've answered our questions. There are aspects that we still need to get more information on, but that's not down to you. That's due to them being a technical query. And I believe that we have as it stands right now, I believe we have a sound, if challenging, budget to be going forward to recommending to the executive and then to full council in February. Happy birthday to me once again. It's always my birthday week, that one. But I think the only other aspect that we need to do is that this committee write a report. And I once again look to the officer team supporting this committee to write that report and for a sanity check from me. So can I have members voice of opinion in favour of that, so I can get this report right, so we can have that added into the pack for consideration by the executive and full council in February. That's okay. I'll get a show of hands, please. That's unanimous, that point of view. So thank you very much. And Graham, John, and the rest of the team around you, thank you very much. There's more work that needs to be done, but that's more making it lockdown 3 and presenting it to executive. Graham, John, do you have anything final to say? But other than, once again, my thanks to you and teams.
Guy, no, I haven't got anything more to add. No, I appreciate your sentiments, and I'll pass them on to the staff involved.
Thank you. If that's the case, then everyone else can go apart from Phil, Shirley, and Anne. We're just going to quickly do the forward plan for the March meeting. But gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a very good rest of your evening.
And
thank you, Guy. Thank you, and the committee for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, so March 28th. Hope everyone's got it in their diaries already. It's going to be another busy meeting. Hands up, who's surprised? So we've got the flood risk management update. Francesca's confirmed she's okay for that, isn't she, already? So that's good. Police and fire. We've had a positive response back from the fire brigade. We haven't yet had the police, so I will be nagging them later on this week. We've got the domestic abuse contract 6-month update, which is going to be an important view to see how that's changed and how that's live in action, excuse me. And then we got the public protection partnership update, which will probably be the final one before everything goes live on that one. And then it will be an ongoing item of agenda. There are 2 aspects that will not be coming this municipal year, and that is the borough-wide parking strategy and the customer journey experience. They're not going to be ready in time for March. So they're not going to be coming this municipal year as things stand, because I believe we go straight into Perth like the week after that, don't we? So we're not going to have any chance to look at them. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that, seeing as we've done the bulk of the year and now we get all the fun stuff? No? Okay, if that's the case, then we can draw the meeting to a close. At just gone 9:32. So thank you very much for attending this evening, everyone. Thank you very much for attending online, and for those watching, thank you very much, and have a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.